Okay, so we will be looking at excitability, contractibility, extensibility, and elasticity. These are some of the key characteristics of muscle tissues. So we're going to start off with a definition for excitability. Sometimes it's also referred to as irritability. And this is the ability to receive and respond to a nerve impulse. So basically, we can respond to some sort of stimuli and nerve impulse that tells us we need to do something. Why do we even care about this? Well, this enables communication between the brain and the muscles. This is what makes it possible to get the message from the brain that says get up and walk around the room to the muscles that actually do the action. So an example in action, your biceps will contract when your brain signals to lift that weight you're trying to pick up. That's pretty easy, right? Okay, then we're going to move on to contractibility. And it is the ability to shorten when stimulated. So one of the key things you need to understand is that muscles only pull, they don't push. So muscles will contract and relax. And so contractibility is that idea that we're going to contract. We're going to shorten when the message comes that indicates they need to shorten. The whole point of this is to produce tension and movement. If we can't produce our tension and movement, we can't move. And so the heart muscle contracts to pump blood. That's the whole reason for the heart muscle to contract, is to push out that blood so we can send it around the body. If you go back to the bicep from the previous example, the bicep contracts so that we're able to lift that weight. But remember what I said about the whole contract and relax. Understand that as the bicep is contracting, its antagonist is relaxing. Some people might even go that it's stretching, but the idea is that it's releasing that contraction to allow for that movement. So next we have extensibility. And this is the ability to stretch without being damaged. So the idea with these muscles is that they can contract and relax. They can make these motions without overly tearing or damaging. Because if we damage it every time that we contract and relax these muscles, then we really can't function. So the whole purpose here is to prevent tearing and allow for a certain amount of flexibility. So that's really important. And so the hamstrings, and remember hamstrings are a muscle group, stretch when you bend forward. Okay. And our last characteristic is elasticity. And this is the ability to return to original length after being stretched or contracted. So after it has kind of stretched out or it has contracted, we've got to be able to go back to where it was. Obviously, if you think about a rubber band, if you keep stretching and releasing, stretching and releasing, it's going to lose some of that return to normal. Well, we don't want that to happen with our muscles. We want them to always kind of go back to that normal point. And so the idea here is that this will maintain shape and tone for repeated movements. We want to be able to do this over and over and over. So for example, our calf muscle will return to possession after each step. Every time we take a step, we're going to go back to where it originally was. So those are our key characteristics. And then the next thing what I want to look at is the forces, concepts involved in our muscle movement. So we're going to start up here at the top with pressure. The reality is we're always applying a certain amount of pressure. That's what is ultimately going to allow our muscle to contract and expand. And so the definition is force applied over an area. And so for our muscles to do their job, we have to think about where they are moving and what they're trying to apply to. So this impacts our blood flow, our joint stress, our tissue health. I know we've been talking a little bit about how we're seeing more damage in joints and things like that with our younger generation because they're so involved in these high impact activities, and we can see this. So we find, for example, for ladies and gentlemen who might wear a higher heel on their shoes, and remember there's a lot of boots that have a heel on them. Even cowboy boots typically have a heel, so I really do mean it when I say ladies and gentlemen, and the higher the heel, the more pressure is put on all those little foot joints. Think about where we're putting that pressure down with our phalanges and our metatarsals and things like that. Okay. Now we're going to move over and we're going to talk about torque. And torque has to do with twisting or a rotational force around the joint. And if you think about it, some joints are going to have definitely more rotational force than others. The effect we have on the body when it comes to torque is that it produces that rotational motion. So example, pitching a baseball or turning your head. Think about these people who are pitching baseballs and how much force and everything they're putting on that rotation, that ability to swing that whole arm around the way they normally do. Whereas when you're shaking your head, normally that's a more gentle and less stressful motion, but they're both a rotational motion. Then we're going to move downwards and we're going to go into tension. The idea of tension is this is a pulling or stretching force from muscle contraction. So as you contract the muscle, you're going to feel more strain if you're doing this excessively. And that's one of the things when they have you lifting weights, when you're trying to build that muscle and that muscle strength, is they have you push to a certain point, but they don't want you to push beyond a point because they don't want to actually cause damage, but they want to push it just enough that you're basically challenging that muscle to help build it. So you hold a plank position for a while, that would be tension, but they don't want you to hold it too long because that can cause other issues and bring in like muscle fatigue and things like that. Okay, now we're moving over here to elasticity, which if you remember, that's also one of the characteristics that we talked about. And so this is that ability to stretch and recoil or return to its normal thing. This prevents injury and helps store energy because we want to be able to stretch and release over and over. So our tendons will recoil during jumping. They'll go back to that normal position. And then the last force that we want to focus on is specifically movement, because ultimately the whole point of muscles is movement. So this results is the result of balanced internal and external forces. We want the movement of the muscle to balance out with what we're trying to lift. If we're trying to lift a box of feathers versus we're trying to lift a box the same size that is full of 10-pound weights. Obviously one is heavier than the other, so we need to be able to apply the appropriate pressure, torque, elasticity, tension, movement, all of these things together to lift that box. If we lift a box of weights first and then we're trying to lift the box of feathers and we don't know what's in it, we might put way too much effort and way too much force behind lifting that box of feathers, and the box of feathers goes flying up in the air. Whereas if we lift the box of feathers first, we might then move to the box of 10-pound weights, not knowing it's a box of 10-pound weights, and try to put the same force behind that we did for the box of feathers, and we can't even lift the box. So it's all about trying to find that balance. So when we're running, when we're swimming, when we're throwing, we always want a balance of what the muscles are doing to what we are trying to achieve. So I hope that kind of gives you a better understanding of the key characteristics of forces involved in the muscular system. Okay.